Welcome everyone. Welcome to today's meeting. What we'll do is we'll make introductions in a short time. Before the item begins though, we'll do some housekeeping. The fire alarm. A fire practice is not expected. If the alarm sounds, can you all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. If there is anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. I would also like to ask everyone in here to ensure that your mobile phones are switched off onto silent mode, please. If you want to just do that, 1 second. This meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask all those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio can be captured? Any members of the public entering the Council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. Are there any public in the... No? Just the press, thank you. If any member of the public or press is intending to record or film any part of today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the actual conduct of the meeting. Moving on to the agenda, item number 1, apologies for absence. I've received an apologies from Jason Charity, Councillor Charity. Any other apologies? No. Good. Item 2, to consider the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting. Agenda item 5 is not an exempt report. However, appendices to the reports contain exempt information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information, and that is as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended. Therefore, if members wish to discuss the information contained in appendices, the public and press will be excluded from the meeting whilst members deliberate in private. Members of the public and press will be invited back into the meeting after the deliberations are concluded. We intend to defer any questions that fall into this area within part 2 of the meeting, as well as any issue highlighted for part 2 during this meeting. Declarations of interest, if any, item 3. If you have an interest, please declare this and a form will need to be completed following the meeting. Please contact Christine Rothwell or Caroline Martin, who can assist you with the process. I suggest it's Caroline because Christine's poorly. Public statements. There are no public in there, so we skip that. There's no public in here. We would have given them 20 minutes for statements, up to 5 members of the public. South Yorkshire Airport City, approvals required to support the full reopening of the airport. I'd like to welcome members of the Audit Committee today, and could I please ask that officers introduce themselves? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Damien Allen, Chief Executive.
Hi, I'm Debbie Hogg and I'm the Corporate Director for Corporate Services, and I'm also the SRO for the project.
Hello, Faye Tyus, Service Director for Finance and Technology and the Council's Section 151 Statutory Officer too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Christian Foster, I'm the Strategic Lead and Programme Director for South Yorkshire Airport City.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the officers to provide a short introduction to the item, if you could. Thank you.
Well, they're a bit of a sprung on us, so thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. This is, in my opinion, it's an amazing project. It'll bring great opportunities for the place of Doncaster in terms of reopening the airport. It provides enormous, as it says in the report, there's no other investment that the council will bring to achieve this level of growth, jobs and employment opportunities increased skills in terms of high-end skills, and generally the circular economy that it brings. So our business case isn't about profitability per se. It is about the economic well-being and health and benefits for the place of Doncaster. So that's the big picture, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Would anybody else like to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. The specifics of the decision before Cabinet, of course, are the receipt of the funding from South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. And as a combined authority, of course, it has the economic remit to grow and increase the economic prosperity of South Yorkshire. In that context, the decision that was made by SIMCA on the 9th of September agreed that actually the business case, after extensive assurance work, was good value for money. Obviously, the distinction between that decision and the one before you is us receiving that and articulating what that current financial plan will be for the implementation and the opening of the airport. There is, of course, a subsequent decision coming to full council that is linked to this, which relates to the capital borrowing requirement and the loan to the special purpose vehicle Fly Doncaster Limited. Just to put that in some context, Chair. Thank you.
Appreciated, thank you. Anything else? Great. The matter we have to consider today is significant and unique, therefore highlights the size of decision under discussion. I will ask for questions from OSMC first, and they are the members in the front row, then the Audit Committee, then any other member who has requested to ask a question. Can I please ask, if you wish to ask a supplementary question, please come through myself, the Chair. Right, moving on to question 1. We're talking about early funding flows and cash management. And Jane, if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. I'll ask it in the two parts that it's written. What assurances need to be in place before the proposed loan is taken out? Thank you.
I'm assuming by proposed borrowing, we're talking about the council borrowing the money in terms of the shortfall. So I suppose really in order to get to that position, we've set out in the report what the estimated shortfall is. We need to, so one of the things we need to get finalised is the grant agreement with SIMCA. So we've put into the report, we've got a draft agreement, we're currently discussing the grant agreement and the precedent conditions discharge. So that's one of the pieces of work that we've delegated in the report and we will be ensuring is in place. So the assurances are we've done a lot of work to ensure that the estimates can be delivered within the overall funding. Because one of the key things is that we need to demonstrate that it can be ring-fenced within the grant funding that SIMCA are going to be providing us. What we can't allow is for this to kind of, impact on the general fund, and we've kind of looked at ring-fencing the cost and ring-fencing that spend. So the assurances are really in terms of the assurances provided in the report, in terms of all the estimates, what work has taken place to generate those estimates, and then obviously the decision before, really in terms of the council decision to accept the grant, or cabinet decision to accept the grant, and then council decision in terms of the borrowing.
Are there sort of time restrictions on getting the grant agreements, and do we anticipate any delays?
We're working with SIMCA closely, really, in terms of getting the grant agreement finalised, and we won't be, as the report identifies, that decision is delegated, there's decisions delegated, and we won't be taking that decision until that grant agreement is finalised.
Thank you. The second part of the question, how confident are you that the initial funding flows between SIMCA, CDC and Fly Doncaster will be fully synchronised during the start-up and construction phases? And what contingency exists if grant receipts lag behind expenditure? Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, we are working with SIMCA on finalising the grant agreement. We haven't finalised the payment terms, but generally we would expect it to be based on the cash flow forecast and generally grant received in advance. As detailed in the report, there is a shortfall at a point in time, and that's what we need to borrow for. So we'll need to continue to review and undertake an annual review, and if that the shortfall is greater than what we've kind of, estimated in the budget, then we might need to take some more borrowing, but we need to ensure that it's overall within the overall, ring-fenced amount of the grant. So we need to continue to monitor it. So I think in the report there's the profile of the loan and the loan to FDL, and what we've done is we've looked at what the costs are, where the grant is coming in, and calculated the shortfall. And it's at the point that we need to borrow for that shortfall. So if it's a bit earlier, then we might need to borrow a little bit earlier. But ideally, we've included in there the principle that we minimise spending that early year as much as possible, so that we can push back any potential borrowing. Because where we can do that, it reduces our future interest costs.
Thank you. As Faye's describing, there's an interrelationship between the monies that's coming from Simca, the monies that go from CDC to Fly Doncaster. And in terms of the synchronisation, which I think is the important part of this question, the resources that are coming from Simca will be predetermined and codified and set out in that grant agreement. And they're broadly in line with the resources that have been availed through the gain share and the integrated settlement. So that in terms of confidence about resourcing, once that grant agreement has been signed, then those resources will flow. And the conversation we've had with Simca is that when they receive the funding, because they receive it from central government, it's a bit like a relay race. When they receive the funding, that they will pass that resource over to CDC. So therefore, what Faye's describing is then the more complicated part is then ensuring that there's the flow between CDC and FDL, and that I'm sure we'll talk about that much more into the scrutiny meeting. That's the part that will need the most close attention, but I wanted to provide the committee with the understanding that confidence about, once that grant agreement signed, the resources that underpinning this whole proposition will come into the council via that route, via that grant agreement.
No supplementary, Councillor Kidd, thank you very much. Moving on to question 2, which is borrowing exposure and interest costs. Councillor Booth, if you'd like to ask a question.
What level of borrowing do you anticipate FDL will actually need to reach full operational capability? How are repayments structured, including any early year subsidies?
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Included in the report is the estimated loan for Fly Doncaster, totaling the 128 million over the first, up to that first 10-year period. The profiles in the report starts off at 14 million and then increases on the earlier years, and then slowly kind of that tapers off as because what it's based on is the estimated income, the costs, and what so it's included in there the initial capital and that shortfall really in terms of cash flow. So it's estimated at 128 million and the profiles in the report. We have included contingency within that, and we're proposing that of the contingency, half is held by CDC as well, really in terms of kind of providing that prudence really in terms of those estimates. So that's included in there. The report identifies EBITDA post year 9 of 230 million, and it's anticipated that that would be available to repay, to make the loan repayments, including interest. We haven't set an actual profile in terms of those repayments, but what we will be doing is, as part of the annual review, and looking at making the repayments as early as possible. There will be a loan agreement between the council and Fly Doncaster, and that will set out all the specific arrangements. The report includes a delegation to finalise that loan agreement, because we've kind of developed the principles in terms of that, what information requirements are needed, how that annual review will work, because in some years it might be that our estimates, they might need more or less, so we kind of need to be flexible in terms of how that loan is kind of drawn down, or how we have that, I think we'll probably come on to in terms of what governance will be in place really in order to manage and monitor that delivery and that kind of loan drawn down. I think that's it, yeah.
Any supplementary?
No, thank you.
We'll move on to question 3 then. This is freight-led operations and market readiness. Councillor Reid, I believe there's 2 aspects to this. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair has said, the second half may well need to go to the second stage, and that's up to you, okay? Given freight operations are expected to start before passengers, how robust are the commercial agreements and volume forecasts that underpin early year revenue, and what risk do you attach to underperformance in that area?
Thanks, Councillor Reid. I think the quick answer is extremely and low risk. That's a very quick answer and frank answer. But actually, if I wanted to provide a little bit more colour to that kind of response. So from day one, we appointed some very well, I would say, aviation experts, extremely knowledgeable. Some of these are, ex-managing directors for airports, both regional airports, as well as larger airports within the UK. So the forecasting from a freight perspective, we're highly confident. I think if you kind of think about where we were at operating previously as an airport, so this was an airport that was operating roughly around 23,000 tonnes of freight in its heyday. So if you think kind of just before COVID 2019, and if you think just an hour down the road, you've got East Midlands doing 400,000 tonnes of freight, and they're obviously looking at expansion plans of roughly acquiring an additional 125 acres just to be able to deal with the kind of the freight and the kind of commercial position we're facing within the UK at this moment in time. So back to the kind of the initial answer is we're extremely positive around some of the companies that have presented themselves from a freight and operational freight forwarding perspective, and we're really excited about their freight proposition at the airport, recognising it's a balanced approach as well. I think the other piece, just to say, is that last week we appointed the head of cargo, and obviously the head of cargo will be supporting ourselves within the council, Fly Doncaster, as well as Munich supporting us in regards to that kind of growth strategy around that kind of cargo city proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. No supplementaries.
Just let my colleague in, then we'll move on to part 2 of yours, yeah?
Thank you. Well-being, Debbie, you mentioned well-being, and where I'm going here with the freight, what times are we expecting these freight flights to go? I think we can assume, there seems to be a lot of it assuming, but we could expect that those to be at night. I'll wait for your response, I'm sorry. But we can expect that to be at night. So how does well-being, as you've said, is one of the drivers for this, work with people and people that live in Doncaster that may be disturbed by these night flights?
Thanks, Councillor Cox. I think there's a few elements to that. Obviously, you're aware that there's a previous Section 106 agreement that determines the kind of the noise levels and routes at a particular time. And obviously, beyond 10 o'clock in the evening, those kind of large freight flights that were coming into the airport clearly were coming via the northern route, so over Blackstone, rather than the southern route over Bawtry. But we also recognise that, and we'll get onto this in terms of a latter question around that airspace change process, and recognising that we need to go out and consult with the residents and businesses around those noise levels and noise routes, specifically in getting our licence and certification back. So we recognise as an airport that we need to work with the community and the businesses, and so hopefully from a health and wellbeing point of view, that's factored in our determination around those kind of level of flights that come in. I think the other thing is, clearly this was an airport that was operational, since 2005. The size of aircraft, obviously the revolution that's taking place in the UK industry at this moment in time, a lot of the kind of the aircraft that have been built by Boeing and Airbus are very much more in that kind of environmentally friendly category, and hopefully in terms of technological advances, the kind of flights that are coming into the airport are a lot less noisier. If you think, for instance, one of the world's largest freight places, the Antonov, used to come in here as obviously with 4 engines. It was extremely loud and for residents. So hopefully it's that kind of balanced approach, but obviously we have to consult with the kind of the general public, and that's what's key to this.
Thanks. Still waiting for where wellbeing thing is, but I'm sure that will come with consultation. At what point does that consultation get triggered? Because obviously you're having the communication with the companies that want to come in, and I'm assuming I'm going to hear the word commercially sensitive at some point, but they're going to want to come in. It needs to expand to make the money. There's going to be traffic movements moving cargo backwards and forwards to motorway and everything else. How does that all fit together? Because the consultation isn't happening, but the funding is potentially being drawn down that would trigger everything moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Cox. So, obviously, from a consultation point of view, we're getting into the question later around an airspace change process. So, on stage 3, particularly in regards to the beginning of next year, as we start to do that more formal consultation with the community and residents. As you can imagine, sorry, I didn't answer your previous question. There is a health and wellbeing strategy or document that is published and produced, which will be part of our framework of suite of lots of policies and strategy for the airport. Councillor.
Thank you. Part B. Oh, sorry. My apologies.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back on terms of, because as part of the opening remarks, I was more talking about the business case and that holistic position that we're taking on behalf of Doncaster as well as South Yorkshire. So it's that wider, I get where you're at in terms of the impact locally. And as Christian's just articulated, there's a lot of information that's gathered as part of that airspace change process. So that'll be considered as part of the considerations that the CAA undertake, as well as any discussions that take place from a local planning point of view. So that's at the more local end. The business case is about the economic well-being of the place, that people will enjoy improved skills, greater prosperity in terms of remuneration, because they're effectively the jobs that we'll be attracting will be more high skilled, high valued, highly paid, and it's through that form that people will have better health and well-being chances. So that is basically the macro, as opposed to the ward-based issues that I'm referencing. So hopefully that clarification, it provides that these are all important and will be considered, but they are considered in different places at different points. Mine was about the bigger picture in terms of the business case. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we ask the next part of it, if you feel it needs to move to part 2 of the meeting, please just say so. Sorry, David.
No, sorry, Chair. And actually, I'm probably being a bit cheeky asking a rhetorical question of my colleague. But I think the premise of Councillor Cox's question was around the impact of night flights on health and well-being in the immediate vicinity, or indeed flight paths to and from the airport. It was really just a question for clarification, Christian, because obviously the trajectory for passenger numbers is over a period of time, and the assumption would be that any freight presumably would be occupying free daytime slots as a preference to nighttime flying.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. Obviously, it all depends on regards to the freight forwarders. Certain freight forwarders operate in different markets. Some of those, as you can imagine, the Chinese market, the UAE market, the American market. So times slightly differ dependent on the kind of the freight forwarder. But traditionally, as you know, from a freight perspective, as you rightly pointed out, Councillor Cox, the reason why, in terms of freight flights via an evening is because obviously it doesn't disrupt the kind of the commercial proposition. So what we recognise is there's going to be a balanced approach, but I think predominantly a lot of the freight will be by the evening. Yeah, thanks, David.
I've learnt my lesson. Faye, have you got anything? Thank you. No worries. Councillor Reid.
Hi, yeah, just to back up what the chair has just said, you've got that second half in front of you, which basically is about cargo flights down to the company, the cargo, the routes and the amount. Does that need to move to the second half?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll know that. Yep.
No supplementaries.
Thank you. We'll know that and then move on. Question 4 is about programme delivery and CAA certification from myself. Can you outline the key milestones that must be achieved with the Civil Aviation Authority between now and 2028? And what would be the financial and reputational impact if certification or airspace approvals are delayed? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So, in regards to an airspace change process, it refers to 7 independent stages, which require, obviously, a detailed response that makes sure that our airspace is managed in a safe manner. So, from the very beginning, we've approached a company called Trax International. Trax are well known in the UK for supporting entities such as ourselves in regards to that management of an airspace change process. Traditionally, so an airspace change in the UK is managed by the Civil Aviation Authority, and obviously we are regulated via accordance with the CEA and the regulations. Clearly there are different stages. So if you take, for instance, stage 1 and stage 2, traditionally what tends to happen is an airport coming in, a new airport, would then be looking at designing its airspace. But Doncaster already had a designed airspace. So the pushback that we've been working with the Civil Aviation Authority was specifically about the opportunity to kind of merge those stages, in particular kind of stages 1 and 2. So traditionally, if you think an airspace change process could take an airport 2, 3, 4 years. And one of the things that we've been working privately behind the scenes with our aviation advisor, Trax International, is specifically to get an airspace change process, which takes roughly around about that 12 to a kind of 18 months. Now, we recognise as part of an airspace change process, as you start moving into kind of stage 3, specifically that consultation around noise levels that you alluded to, Councillor Cox, that obviously it all depends on what is responded back. You'll have neighbouring airports, the GA community, or general aviation community, the likes of flying schools and glider clubs, will all want to put some form of response in, as similar to environmental organisations, specifically about our operation as an airport. So we recognise from a consultation point of view, we don't know what's going to come in, but we can surmise and guess. So what we are clear is that we need to back, in terms of the different stages with delivery. And what we mean by that is both the capital infrastructure that we acquire on site, as well as the key appointment to post. So yesterday was the deadline for air traffic controllers. We're pleased to say we had over 35 applications for those air traffic controllers, which is absolutely brilliant, because when we talk about kind of the airspace and its redesign and certification, we need to back that up with having the right people in post and the right capital infrastructure on site. So we've got a very aggressive timeline with the CEA, and working with the CEA and Department for Transport, we are keen to make sure that we can get aircraft in the skies as soon as safely as possible. And what we're talking about from a timeline point of view, we talked about that kind of freight at the end of 26 and kind of commercial in 2027. We recognise there's lots of different spinning plates, and we assess on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you. My only supplementaries. Apologies, Faye. Sorry.
Sorry. I suppose just to highlight, the current assumptions in the financial plan are based on the current programme plan. So they are based on the dates that kind of Trax have provided. They are based on, the milestones of critical path. So just to kind of, highlight there is that alignment between the current programme plan, the dates that we're working to, and what's in the current financial plan. So it isn't, we've set a financial plan and it's based on more, challenging, pushing. It's based on the current and with some allowance as well in terms of those contingencies. It also aligns with work that Simca did in terms of the assurance process as well, in terms of those start dates. And if they do slip, it is a material, I can't go into too much because but it would be a material impact really from a financial perspective.
Debbie, Damien? No? Are we on track? Are we on schedule at the moment? Have we come up against any clear barriers? Christian, are we on track with CAA?
No, we're on track with the CEA. I think one of the things we recognised early on is the risk around what's happening in the UK aviation market around the approach of air traffic controllers. We refer to them as kind of unicorns, and we recognise we may struggle to get ATCOs and senior ATCOs, and obviously having 35 obviously to apply for the ATCO position is extremely fantastic for us as an airport. It shows you, in terms of the great team that we're building on site, what the great asset we have on site, and so at the moment we're managing those risks, and that was one which was significant, and pleased to say we're in a good position.
Thank you. Just a quick one from my colleague.
Thank you. I obviously don't know how you go about interviewing for air traffic controllers. I hope it's not like a taxi base operator, but but with that in mind, do you get different levels of base so we know at the moment the airspace isn't really defined. So what level of air traffic controller are we interviewing for? Is it the top one, or is it the basement one, and then we work our way up? Well, how does it work?
The structure, I would like us to talk a little bit about the structure, because that's what you're asking, and it's quite a good question in terms of, but I'd rather, because we've developed a proposition, I'd rather if we can talk about that on part of the closed session, if that's okay.
I'll make a note. Thank you very much. We'll come back to that. Nothing more from anyone? No, good. Right, we'll move on to question number 5. Cost control and early losses. Councillor Jackson, please.
Thank you, Chair. What measures are in place to monitor and cap operational losses through the first 10 years of operation? And how will CDC ensure that these losses do not exceed the modelled assumptions and affect the general fund position?
I'm going to kick this question off, thank you. It's not just going to be for 10 years, it's like a puppy. This is going to be a long-term arrangement. And I want to talk about, there's effectively a number of organisations or parts of the system that will provide some degree of support and control. So that's starting with the Fly Doncaster Board. It comprises of 8 individuals. Those individuals have got a fiduciary responsibility for managing the effectiveness of the organisation. Faye's described already the framework that and the interrelationship between CDC and the Fly Doncaster. Fly Doncaster will need to operate within that governance framework. So we've created a operational budget. That operational budget's a starting point. There will be some flexibility within that, but what won't be negotiable is effectively the bottom line, which is the loan between the council and Fly Doncaster. There'll be parameters that are set out in that loan agreement, which set out the monitoring arrangements, both within the organisation. On a monthly basis, it'll be a bit like a regular heartbeat. The monthly requirements in terms of financial and non-financial information, and quarterly information and annual information, it's no different from how we do the council's business to some extent, and I would suggest probably most commercial organisations. So that's the first. What happens within the organisation, FDL, how then that relationship between FDL providing that information, holding the CDC then holding that organisation to account, because it'll effectively be like a client arrangement. There'll also be reporting information that's required, and we've already talked about how that will get reported, and it's incorporated into the report, how that's reported to Cabinet, those charged with governance, and also of view and scrutiny. I've also put in the report, we'll need to carefully consider how those matters, depending on the nature of those matters, are considered, because it's going to be largely a commercial matters that are reported, then there's I anticipate a lot of that will need to be in closed sessions, but nevertheless, it'll still need to flow in that way. And then there's also looking through the lens of the funder. So SIMCA have got equal requests. As Faye's described, we're still working through the detail of the grant agreement, but they've already indicated that there's reporting requirements. We've suggested that it should mirror what we're describing here. So in terms of the reporting lines go FDL, CDC, SIMCA, so that it's one source of information, one version of the truth flowing through to the different entities. The other part is about who's playing a part now. As I've said, there's 8 people that'll be governing FDL, of which there'll be 2 independent as part of the funding requirements. 2 of those will be independent people that are nominated and responsible to reporting through to SIMCA. And they see them as independent eyes. We've had a conversation with them about the fact that they will need to be skillful in terms of sitting in FDL and operating for the best interest, because under company law, as most people will know, you've got a responsibility for, first and foremost, company first, second, reporting requirements. So how that actually works in practice, but certainly in terms of the flow of information should provide the necessary information in order to execute the relevant controls. I think they were the points I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I just need to emphasise as well from my statutory role, particularly as you've kind of picked up on the general fund and it not impacting on that, really in terms of the chart in the report at paragraph 72 talks about the programme governance structure. And I would see that those CDC client meetings, I will be heavily involved in those on a monthly basis to maintain and ensure that it isn't, projected to impact on the general fund, because that is a key thing really from my position in terms of the statutory role, ensuring that it, we're kind of holding and we're funding it through the SIMCA grant, and we've got that close monitoring. So I would say I'm
sorry, this does look a little bit like Chuckle Brothers, doesn't it? Sometimes it's when you hear somebody else's, it just jolts, because what we're wanting to do is ensure that there's the grant agreement, the loan agreement, and therefore the reporting arrangements are completely aligned. So again, there's no breaks in the chain. People are super clear from get-go what's needed, when it's needed, when, what form it will take, and then that information can, that there's remedies really around if that information isn't provided, etc. But we're still working through the detail, but there needs. I think there was a question earlier in the meeting around synchronisation. It's going to be super clear for us to make sure that the grant agreement, loan agreement, and the way that the company operates are all synchronised, so that there is no breaks in that chain.
Just check with any supplementary, Frank?
No, thank you, Chair.
Obviously, this is a commercial proposition, and we want the money flowing in, passengers. What role is it Munich Airport International? What's their role in making it successful?
I'll start, but I'm pretty sure that Christian would probably also want to comment on this one as well. They are providing strategic input to the development of the airport. They're providing both direct support in terms of specific specialist areas. So they're developing products, so they're supporting us as, for example, on our, you've got to have, as part of the aerodrome certification, you've got to have an aerodrome manual. So there's sections within there, some of which are staff, as Christian alluded to. We've got the Chief Operating Officer, we've got a head of service for fire and safety. They will develop certain parts, but Munich are also supporting on the direct provision of other elements. And they've also got programme management support, so they're providing that overview, making sure that the programme of work that because we've used the programme in order to create the operational budget, which is also then informs the loan agreement. So all these things are interlinked. They've quality assured our delivery plan for the next 24 years, so that they're providing a number of lenses really. They're having the experience of operating airports. They've looked at from a regional airport perspective. You know, as I say, they're providing direct support on certain elements and oversight on others.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just further to Debbie's comments. So if you take, for instance, Munich Airport, so they're in the top 10 airports in the world. So they're roughly dealing with about 40 million passengers and around 400,000 tonnes of freight. Their business model is certainly interesting because what they're also renowned for doing is going into places around the world and supporting the redevelopment of airports. So Newark in USA, Maldives, even Sofia, and a number in Europe. So they've got a fantastic business model. They've got a fantastic leadership team that's been here on site, the lead from the top, and their technical expertise, which Debbie alluded to. So if you're in particular around that kind of commercial proposition, so we're in that process of obviously commercially negotiating with airlines, and Munich are shoulder to shoulder with ourselves, specifically around making sure that we get the best deal for Doncaster. They also support us on, you know, that kind of terminal redesign, the IT, various IT packages, as well as the kind of the car park and fees and charges around that kind of structure. So there's so many different elements to the Munich element, but they're a fantastic, well-known international business and know how to run airports successfully.
Thanks. Councillor Kidd, does that answer your question? Vice Chair?
Thanks. Just going back to synchronised, does this funding, the loan and all this stuff that we need to discuss, does it have a sell-by date, a best before date? Does it run out, or is it by next week? No, you're not having it.
I think that's why Faye's talked about the flexibility, because it's structured, because it's got the flow. If there is a shift in terms of, it starts with no, it's not your first source document, but because how we've built up the operational budget is by going, how many staff do we need? What's the cost of running the airport, etc. What incomes can we think we can generate, etc. So once you've got that, then we know what the bottom line looks like. Bottom line in terms of the cash flow generates the position in relation to the loan. In terms of if there's any shifts, there's obviously we can track it because we've got that as the baseline, and it can shift one way, it can shift that way. You know, to the, you know, if there is a delay in any of the expenditure, or if there's any underspends or overspends, then there's some degree of flexibility because we're basing it on. It's a big picture, ultimately. I don't know if that helps in terms of the inter-sell by date. It's structured over, the proposition is it'll be sealed for 24 years effectively, but there'll be parameters within there, as I've described, through the reporting arrangements, through to the client, to the council, so that there is that degree of flexibility, because what we don't want is the airport to be constrained by, oh, you haven't spent that amount of money but you've achieved that level of income. It needs to be seen in the round. It needs to be a sophisticated conversation that takes place at FDL board in the first instance, because that's where the responsibility should sit. You know, we're going to have a number of people who have got commercial and aviation experience sat around that table. That's where the first control exists. The second will be within the client. So the loan should be a secondary stopback measure once the first one's been exploited to its maximum potential.
Just really just to seek some clarification, Councillor Cox, were you talking about the core funding from Simca? Is there a due-by date on that? And that obviously links to the funding agreement that we've referenced earlier. Sorry, yeah, the grant agreement. So at the point at which we get the grant agreement sealed, yeah, it's done. That's it. The money is transferred to us on that payment mechanism that we've just talked about, where there's an annual contribution. The point at which we don't need any more of that money. So, for instance, the discussion that we've just had around the gearing between the loan and the commercial operation of the airport, then actually that means that we can seek to put less of that gain share funding in. And I know that's been a particular question. In fact, I think it might even have been raised in the media. A particular question in terms of this local authority cannot commit to funding any activity unless it has a secure source of funding. Yeah, in this case, it's the Simca funding, yeah, together with the loan, which provides the upfront element because the capital cost is front-loaded, yeah, to the Fly Doncaster company. What it doesn't do is dictate that actually you have to use it all on that purpose, because that is subject to the commercial operation of the airport and the degree to which it draws an income from other sources. But we would not be acting in our statutory duty if we were to suggest that at this point, I tell you what, there might be some income from here, there might be some income from there, so we'll only actually borrow this amount. Yeah? So we have to be very clear about the source of funding and the element of that funding that we would convey in terms of a commitment against this particular use. That doesn't mean that ultimately it's all dispensed for that purpose. Just want to clarify that, because I did read something in one of the media outlets that seemed to suggest that it was a commitment forever.
Thanks for that clarity. What percentage of slippage is there within these? Because we are hearing a lot of estimates, and I'm not, yeah. Oh, everything at this point in time is obviously up in air. But what percentage slippage is acceptable?
I think just coming back to, in terms of the grant funding, so as you say, in terms of we're finalising the grant agreement, the funding was set out in the Simca report. It showed the breakdown of all the funding, and the biggest proportion is the gain share funding, isn't it, really, in terms of that amount that's kind of cumulative to date that we've kind of not spent previously, and then that future 5.3. So the grant agreement and finalising that is important, and also simply continuing to receive that grant is important as well in terms of the overall project. So the grant funding is profiled based on the current information in terms of how Simca are going to receive that, and then as Debbie explained, then that will flow to the council. And what we've kind of got is, and this is where it kind of leads on to that borrowing approval, is where there's a difference between what we've estimated Fly Doncaster require in those early years versus the grant, then we will be looking to borrow within for that shortfall. But ensuring that we're managing all those costs within the overall grant envelope. So where there is interest costs, they are met from that grant funding as well. So there will be movements between. That's why we need to have that annual review in terms of what's it looking like, where's it, and we'll need to kind of be taking decisions. So it might be that in the plan there was X amount of capex that we were proposing to spend in X year, but actually Fly Doncaster board might have to look at that and say, do we need to delay that? How do we? So it'll need to be that ongoing review in terms of how that is working. What we have included in there, as I said, is 20% contingency in terms of the capex. So that is some, in terms of that potential slippage on the capital costs. And again, why we need to have that really, really, strong governance in terms of that programme plan to get it to that reopening in terms of.
Thanks, Faye. The other one is, obviously, we're talking financially stuff. What have audit seen and what input have audit had within this process?
No problem. Anything else?
No.
On to question 6, governance and oversight. Councillor Cobby, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Debbie started to answer some of this a little bit earlier on, but I'll ask if there's any additional answers, that'd be great. During this pre-profitability phase, how will CDC, Simca and Fly Doncaster Limited balance the need for commercial flexibility with transparency and member oversight, particularly where decisions may have material financial implications?
Thanks, Councillor Cobby. I did answer a little bit of it, but I think it'd probably be useful just to nail the fact that there will be 3 statutory committees with eyes on this. So that'd be Cabinet, Overview and Scrutiny, Management Committee and the MCA Board. The MCA may have some other subsidiary board because they have like what they call a Programme Assurance Board that actually might take it into their remit. They haven't sort of formalised that yet, but there'll at least be those three entities where the governance is taking place on a formal footing. As I referenced in the report, because of the commercial nature of what we're proposing, we will need to carefully consider what material comes before those and how they're organised. But certainly that they would be, in my head, the organisations, you know, the committees that would need to have that information. So it might be, for example, because we used to deal with it with, you know, the Children's Trust. We'd separate out the non-financial information and financial information. So there may be something where there could be commentary, which is considered within the open part of meetings, and then the financial matters considered as closed. But you can tell from my response that that's probably something we'd need to work through as we receive information and how it's reported. Certainly the like the annual accounts, that's going to be a public document of FDL, so that information will be lodged in the ordinary way through Companies House and available to all. But during what's in here and that previous question about control, it's going to be important to ensure that there's that degree of granularity received on a regular basis so that you can exercise those controls in the initial stages, but thereafter it might be that you're just reliant then on the annual accounts and reporting through that mechanism. So we'll start tight and we might go loose.
Councillor Cumming, nothing else. Thank you. Question 7, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Governance Fly FLD. What is the process if directors leave the board?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Reid. Perhaps I can just flip back to Debbie mentioned Fly Doncaster board would have 8 members on it. We've got draft MEMS and arts for the company, which we're establishing at the moment. We've specifically, and this does link back to the control questions, we've specifically identified 3 of those 8 members as council nominees. And going back to the tight, that's because we have a fiduciary duty as directors to the company, but we also have a statutory duty for public resources. And obviously, another point that Faye made earlier, as the statutory Section 151 officer, she's arm's length from that in terms of being able to separate those duties physically in making her judgments around any impacts on the general fund. So I just want to make that sort of separation of duties clear. The other members of the board, we've already alluded to that 2 of those will be Simca nominees, yeah, and they will have each of them financial and commercial expertise for one of them, and another one having significant aviation expertise. Important if you're a commercial airport, you're trying to get that expertise and technical skill set into the board. The other 3 are termed as independent members, yeah, one of which will be the chair. All 3 of those, it will be the responsibility of the council to search, identify and confirm their membership. Again, that's important because then the bulk of the board is actually council or council nominated or council appointed. And that's important because who knows what the future holds. There are moments in every company's life where they have to make difficult decisions. Coming back to the how do they leave, I'm really pleased you've got the sort of the half-empty side. We haven't even filled it yet, but it does equally apply. Each one of those board members will have, and these are standard sort of company terms, will have a 5-year duration. Yeah. So if for some reason anybody, I hesitate to suggest it, passes away or resigns, or their substantive post, they resign, because these aren't individuals, these are nominations by the council, then it's for the council to fill those posts for the residual amount of time of the remaining 5-year period. Okay? Having said all of that, because it is a company wholly owned by the council can exercise its desire if it so wished for whatever reason. Usually it's automatic if individuals under company law have exempt themselves from being a company director, i.e. they are bankrupt or they have committed various crimes that exempt them from holding such office. But ordinarily, if the council so wished, it would only need a 3/4 majority of the members, and if you've worked out the math, then that actually is the membership of the directly appointed and those that are council nominees, would give it the majority to be able to remove a particular director if for whatever reason that occurred. I hope that sort of answers your question, Councillor Reid. It sort of ought to hopefully give you a little bit of sense of the level of grip and control that the council has. Mindful that as an independent company, of course, in the sense that it also means that the directors have to fulfil their fiduciary duty to the company as well.
Thank you, Damien. A predicted supplementary of 151 already answered, so no further supplementaries from me.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Move on to question 8, economic impact. Councillor Kidd, please.
Thank you. Can you describe some of the likely benefits that the opening of the airport will bring to Doncaster? And what do you think the benefit to risk ratio is? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kidd. Yeah, great question. So if we talk about kind of the modelling, economic benefit of GVA, so gross value added, and if we look at kind of Doncaster's economy in 2022 was around 6 billion. And so when we employed Jacobs, a well-known international company, supporting us on the kind of economic business case, we described the benefits roughly around kind of 2 to 3 billion to our economy of having an airport, or that South Yorkshire Airport City concept within the region, which is hugely significant when you take 6 billion to 2 to 3 billion. We recognise that obviously South Yorkshire Mail Combined Authority have also had their consultants looking at kind of that GVA, and obviously similar quantums of kind of between 1.5, 2.5 billion GVA. And then we look at kind of the benefit cost ratio. So the Jacobs work employed by ourselves, they identified in the economic business case around that kind of 9 to 1 benefit cost ratio. Now, to let you know, anything above 1 in a benefit cost ratio is seen as extremely good from a kind of benefit cost. So we had 9 to 1. Now we recognise that obviously Simca had some further assurance pieces of work undertaken, and they're kind of at that kind of 2 to 3 quantum in regards to the benefit cost ratio. So still extremely good for a proposition. You asked me about the kind of the economic benefits. So there's many, and obviously the social benefits as well. We've modelled in obviously with Jacobs around the growth in jobs, direct and both indirect. So when you talk about 5,500 direct jobs and 6,000 indirect jobs, that quantum of around 12,000 around that kind of South Yorkshire Airport City is hugely significant, especially if you take, for instance, Wheatley Hall Road in its heyday, when you had ICI, Rockware and Case, they were employing roughly around 20,000 jobs just on Wheatley Hall Road. The other piece is around that kind of skills piece, and I'm also recognising that there's something for us about an airport, about lifting the ambition in communities. And as you can imagine, you know, this is such a huge game changer for a lot of our deprived communities and I want to say classes mini towns, and it presents a significant opportunity to widen individuals' aspirations. And the fact that you've got the likes of partners such as kind of Munich supporting around what does that kind of education and skills proposition look like for ourselves, as well as working with the kind of South Yorkshire education institutions in the private sector, it's hugely significant. I think the other thing is the fact that you've got a number of existing businesses on site who operate in the aviation market, and we're very keen, as they are, to obviously support their growth. And that's brilliant because they are organisations that like to appoint from the local supply chain and recognise in regards to kind of that wage level is significantly higher than the national average, never mind the Doncaster average. So, yeah, that answers your question.
If I could just ask a quick question to do with that. The cost benefit ratio, why were we so far off the mark with 9-1 originally, please?
Yeah, so as you can imagine from a South Yorkshire Airport City concept, we talk about kind of the wider, so that from a South Yorkshire wide level. We also recognise that, look, we've got one of the largest development sites attached to the airport. So if we talk about the IQ site, it's over 3 million square foot of land. As you can imagine, commercially, there are a number of manufacturing companies, maintenance repair overall facilities, hangars, companies that are presenting themselves that are very keen to look at locating here at the airport. So we did, on the basis of kind of the market interest and recognising this was a calculation done around about 2024, was at that 9.1 level. But obviously the work that South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority did wanted to be a bit more on the conservative level. And obviously they're at a very different quantum, still in a good level. But we recognise that obviously we need to update our business case, the one that was produced by Jacobs, and we're currently remodelling the kind of the benefit cost ratio, just to kind of make sure that we are very clear about exactly what it is and what it isn't. But I think just to kind of confirm and provide you assurance as a committee is that, like I say, is we're at that quantum of a plus kind of 2 to 3 on worst case and best case at 9, which is fantastic.
And finally, can that cost rate benefit ratio go up and down throughout the life of the airport?
Sorry, yeah. Can I suppose it might be helpful really for me just come in from the financial plan perspective and how that impacts on the BCR and things like that, because a calculation of the benefits is based on the passenger forecasts. So if you remember when we did the initial forecast, it was done on a specific basis, looking at the catchments across and going down to a really, district data, a low-level data level, looking at previous, where people have previously travelled. It was kind of based on a really granular level, and we had, so the original business case and the financial viability assessment was done on higher passenger forecasts, which then quantified into obviously higher benefits. Now, as part of the assurance, we have the passenger forecasts have been done on a slightly different methodology, and the ones that we've kind of included in our current financial plan are the lower to be prudent. So in terms of, so that impacts on the benefits. So if the passengers are higher, then the benefits will obviously increase. Also linked to the cost as well. So it kind of, the overall benefit cost ratio takes into account the cost as well. So we are, as Christian said, we are going to do some work to have a look at the jobs and look at the passenger forecasts and how that then equates.
That makes sense, David.
Yes, actually, Faye's answered most of what I want to say. Just a bit of context around sort of benefit cost ratio. As Christian's already outlined, a figure above 1 is seen as good value. Above 1.5, it's very good value. Equally, if it's below 0, of course, it's not. And just to give some scope, SIMCA, obviously, the programme review board that we were just talking about, has a number of programmes. Each one of those will have gone through the Treasury's Green Book assessment. They put that out to an independent assessor, and they look at the economic business case. And it does depend upon what assumptions you put in and what variables and other factors. So a business case of a business case that has a BCR of 9 is incredibly high. It's rare that you would get anything more than that, and I've mentioned this, usually road schemes, because they often get to maximise and utilise the benefit fairly quickly, are much higher. But if you just contrast that, say, within the tram, which was 1.63 was the business case and the BCR for that, and the bus franchising, I think, was slightly lower than that. So those are the sorts of quanta. And the piece of work, without going, obviously it's subject to some sort of commercial sensitivity in the pack that came out of SIMCA on the 9th, But the process that they went through was a desktop exercise where they modelled a variety of different assumptions. So what they gave was a range, yeah, depending upon which assumptions you take into account. The rationale behind that, as Faye's already pointed out, is it's illustrative, just as the business case in November 24 was illustrative. The reality, which is the financial case that we've been talking about, is what you actually need to model your BCR on, which is what we're doing, and we're fairly confident that we're going to be in the zone.
Thanks for clarifying that. Councillor Kidd?
The next question is ensuring how jobs go to local people, particularly in the high-paid employment. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Councillor Kidd. I think from day one we've been very clear around creating a skills and aviation partnership, an employment partnership, and that's made up of the educational institutions all based in South Yorkshire, so the universities, the colleges, as well as a number of other direct employers and some of the kind of private sector organisations that are in the aviation world, specifically in our region, the likes of 2XL, Redline, hybrid air vehicles, and companies that are wanting to look at locating into the region as well. So I think we were very clear from day one that it'd be a missed opportunity if we weren't looking at kind of that connection and routes for individuals that have either never been immersed in an aviation world to individuals who have worked previously at DSA. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to make sure that we build, that kind of system that presents, the best opportunities for our residents. And one of that is very much, firstly, obviously, about that skills offer. And secondly, kind of some of the kind of core values of us as a Fly Doncaster around that kind of buy local. And we're very keen to look at where practically possible that obviously we employ the right individuals, but we also look at employing local individuals. So we're hopefully kind of getting that balance from day one.
A few more points. We've used our own local recruitment process and we've turned that round in the council. We're getting far more reach in relation to the number of applicants. We'll probably talk about that as part of Q2, quality and finance and performance reporting. So it's got more reach and more coverage. We've used in local things like Christian uses LinkedIn. So we're trying to get as much local people interested in the jobs that are and opportunities. Because this has been a long time in coming, we've created a bit like a job bank. People have contacted us and we've kept all their details. So we are actively engaging with people, either through word of mouth or directly through when they've provided the details. And I think Christian's he talked about how we upskill, and we'll probably talk about, without giving a few on the question about the APCOs, we'll talk to you about how we're thinking about sort of developing our own and having a career grade. So more of that. But there's a lot of avenues we've used as part of the recruitment process, and touch wood, we're getting good success from that, in terms of recruiting to our heads of service positions as well as some of the others. So it's these approaches are yielding good outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. It's at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. This is about that economic well-being, and it's about building a long-term sustainable economic growth. That is built on a decent pipeline of skills. And the challenge, of course, is we operate in a market, so we've got to get that blend around the immediacy of skills that are out there competitively in the market, and really good to see the sorts of interest that we're getting from the roles that have been advertised. But ultimately, that bit about the grow your own and building a circular economy is that we want to maximise the opportunity for Doncaster people to be able to get the jobs in Doncaster, because then that holds the economic value in Doncaster, contrasting with, obviously, inward investment from more macroeconomic sources. But the key factor is the ability to grow the skills, and those are both the numbers of jobs, but more importantly, I think, elevating the skill level. And that's why that skill partnership with the college and with the UTCs, and also increasingly with Sheffield University and also Sheffield Hallam, so that we get the blend of technical skills. It also means that actually, and we're seeing this already in terms of some of the careers and recruitment fairs, we're already getting a real groundswell of interest from young people. So being able to identify what the particular job roles are, what the particular skill requirements are, not just now and not just in the airport, but also in that wider catalytic area in and around the airport where we want to see inward investment, and that wider South Yorkshire airport city, really important. So this will ramp up as we go. Having said all of that, we've got a particular focus on making sure that we get the right people in post to make sure that we've got the certification, because without that we don't have an operating airport.
Thank you, Dean. Is it okay, yeah? Right, moving on to question 9. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. When fully operational, it states there's likely to be about 5,000 people in employment. Is there any sector breakdown? What I don't mean by that is numbers, but you see on some documents it simply says airside, landside, terminal side. Do you have a set category of where you would align each group of people to? Happy to receive that by email if it's a long list.
No, I can answer that, Councillor Reid. So when I alluded to the Skills and Aviation Employment Partnership, one of the things that we've been modelling in our kind of early days is those different occupations, but not only the occupations that we would be looking at employing as a Fly Doncaster as an operating company, but also recognising the nesting of those different types of aviation-related industries that are wanted to locate around the airport or within the region. So we'd roughly estimated around about kind of 41 different occupations, which we're more than happy to circulate. Yeah.
No supplementaries for me.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Question 10. Question 10, Councillor Hollyworth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Would you be looking at putting on transport for new staff if they haven't got a car, and possibly pick up passengers as well? I noticed that when I was in Edinburgh, they used to have like a loop. Well, they still have got a loop bus, and I thought it was quite good actually. Or something like a park and ride that people can use. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's a really good question. Obviously, when the airport was operational previously, you had the bus services obviously operating. So I think it was the 57A, 57C and the X6, which was obviously recognising there are residents that are working from the airport that were wider than just obviously from a Doncaster perspective. I think, you know, getting into the kind of the Sheffield hub. We also recognised this was an airport that individuals would take taxis into the site or more sustainable routes. I think one of the things that we are very clear about is that kind of access strategy and making sure that we work with the operators around the kind of the flight times, but also in those work shift times as well, to make sure that we have a service or services that match kind of our expectations. So it's obviously where lots of conversations being had behind the scenes, and we continue to make sure that we can look at the different routes in which, you know, individuals as well as passengers and customers can access the site.
There is obviously an opportunity as part of bus franchising, and I know this meeting is not about that, but they're looking at routes, because we know that the routes that currently exist at the moment aren't necessarily, you know, the world's moved on since some of those routes were created. So as part of this early engagement, Simca are looking at you know, the utilisation. They're doing some engagement in the next month or so about the nature of buses, and then in due course they'll be looking at buses, and I would hope that the airport will be part of that consideration about routes that are required and are sustainable in the future. So there's another way of, it doesn't have to be just the here and now, but it could be that we remodel it for the future as well.
Yeah, Debbie stole most of my thunder, Chair. It's not an uncommon characteristic. But at the Bus Services Improvement Programme, which is a fund that went to Simca under the current Enhanced Bus Partnership with the commercial partners, led to 5 new routes at the beginning of this year, one of which is to the airport. And as Debbie points out, one of the key challenges around the current bus network is it tends to have a very city-centric, because that's where the depots are, when actually one of the key requirements for public transport is to connect people into work and places of work, which don't always require a trip into the city centre to come out, because that's not convenient or indeed timely. So one of the pressing points for us in the in the surface access strategy linked to bus franchising, which will be from 2027, is that there is an appropriate shift in the network so that it meets where people want to go in terms of the employment opportunities.
Yeah, Damien, you referred yesterday about the slowness of rail, and so has Debbie. Rail also brings a very good interface with bringing employers in, as well as the public, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that surface access strategy that was part of the SIMCA, one of the key pieces of assurance, it identified two key infrastructure requirements for the future development of the airport, some of which were previously in the planning. And obviously you'll be familiar with originally the East Coast sort of spur. There is still a facility in terms of the local plan for that access into the airport at some point in the future, but more latterly, just before the closure of the airport under the previous owners, there was a proposal for a Lincoln Loop line. That is still identified in the surface access strategy as a requirement, as a point-to-point requirement, because that's what modern airports want, and that's what the business case for that, or the initial outline submission, identified in terms of the form of that rail link. And the second, probably more pressing key requirement is the improvements to Junction 3 in terms of the sort of rotational challenges that we have there to improve the flow of traffic off the M18. And that is a proposal which I know the Mayor is very much pressing as part of the current TCR funding allocation, which SIMCA already have in their coffers.
Thanks, Damien. Thank you, Chair.
And just to finish off on that, what you've just said there, Damien, the freight aspect of it, the dissemination of freight that comes into Doncaster, there's a good chance for a bottleneck there of distributing it. How soon will that infrastructure have to be in place to avoid that bottleneck, because it'll strangle freight, won't it?
I need to take you back to we're starting from a standing start, but we're starting on a template that we know gets the potential up to 1.4 million passengers. Yep. Our trajectory is less than that for the first 10 years, at which point we'll be into positive EBITDA. The challenge, of course, is as well as those passenger numbers by definition increasing, the number of passenger transport movements to the airport also increases. But if you're also ratcheting up freight, and bearing in mind we built together with the private sector and SIMCA at the time the Great Yorkshire Way, that was primarily to create a logistics hub at that point, and also a link to the iPort in terms of rail. And one of the key things that we want to get is integrated freight, yeah, because obviously depending on where that's going, we've got I think it's 46 minutes from the iPort to Immingham, either way in terms of sort of sea to rail, but equally we want to get it onto the logistics hubs that we've got at the moment. So absolutely critical. Also, of course, we've also got the challenge of the A1 junction, and therefore within the scope of what we're proposing, we're very keen to ensure that the scope of the works includes the tailbacks that occur linked to junction 3, as well as the rotation. There is another aligned challenge for us, which is there are the highways, national highways have got a limitation, haven't they, on at the moment, which again we've had feedback through the Department for Transport that would be something they'd be looking to remove, because it has a limit on development on that part of the corridor. So really critical that we prioritise junction 3 first, and then in the medium to long term look at the rail link.
My very last question then, because you've said that, the forecast was something in the region of 50 million for the M18. How much of that bill will we be footing?
So I mentioned the TCR fund, which is the Transport City Region Fund. That money's already been allocated to Simca. It was a sum of 1.4 billion. 500 million of that was for the tram replacement, and 380 something million, I haven't got the exact figures, Chair, was for the bus franchising, which of course is across South Yorkshire, including ourselves. The residual amount, which is, you know, something in the order of 600 million, is still yet to be allocated. So that process will be going on at the moment. What I can tell you is that because of the piece of work that's been done by Simca on the surface access strategy and the 50 million, then that will be prioritised within that allocation process. It has to work its way through. The other point I should say, because I don't want to be a hostage to fortune, Chair, is that 50 million might not be adequate in that regard, but it's certainly a lot less than the residual 600 million that's left in the TCR pot. So I know the Mayor will be pressing for as soon as possible. There are other funds that Simca will be receiving as part of the integrated settlement linked to other infrastructure. It may well be that they're looking to see whether or not those funds displace potential schemes within the TCR, in particular any direct funds for roads, which would obviously be a more logical source from which to fund something like the upgrade to Junction 3. We, however, will still be identifying the requirement. They can then determine the source.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to question 11, operational plans and infrastructure. Councillor Jackson, please.
Thank you, Chair. What revenue would you get by running the car park? Because we all know very lucrative, and the need for more investment. Would you lease that out, and why?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Can we cover this in the private section? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Question 12 then, which is other. Councillor Hollingworth.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've answered part of this question really about in 22 when the airport was closed. It says it wasn't viable with the Munich support that you've got. So that looks pretty good going forward. But the only thing that's worrying is that it's a cost of living crisis. Do you think you'll get the passengers coming through the door?
I'll just open now. You can obviously see my colleagues chomping at the bit to come in on this one. I think we've looked at this all the way around in terms of passengers and freight. We, as Faye indicated, we started with the business case and we were looking at from a much wider geographical area in terms of where passengers might come from in terms of making that shift in order to come to Doncaster and use the airport. And then we, as part of that review, Simca looked at from a bottom-up point of view in terms of the airlines we'd engage with and the likelihood, the nature of the type of destinations they might go to. And we also engaged Munich to do exactly the same thing. So we've looked through it effectively through lots of different lenses, as well as the sort of commercial conversations we've had with various airlines and commercial operators. And I know we're going to come back to freight as a topic from one of the early questions. So from my perspective, it feels like we've looked at things in details, we've reviewed it in a number of ways, and we're looking at things really from quite a pessimistic stroke baseline position in relation to what we think we can achieve in terms of activities. So it's had a good go over it really in terms of, so you're asking a question, do we think it can be achieved? With all the caveats that are around it, you don't know anything until you dive in there and get going. But based on all of the information we've got, we think we can make a viable proposition, or else we wouldn't be making this recommendation.
Thanks, Chair. I think just to add further to what Debbie alluded to was, remember the kind of the customer experience here at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, and it was always voted as one of the most favourable by the customers. And obviously that's working with the likes of TUI and Wizz Air previously. But also recognise the kind of what the asset, we've got a real jewel in Doncaster. We've got one of the longest runways in Europe at 2 miles and 60 metres wide. So it has fantastic potential for those kind of long haul flights, never mind, you know, in terms of the most kind of European flights. So yeah.
Last one. Also, I just wanted to recognise all the work that's kind of been done looking at the wider market. So a lot of the Simca Assurance Review, the initial work by our aviation advisors, kind of looking at passengers that are travelling now, and it's kind of looking at what the market is, how the market's kind of, you know, changed since the COVID impact and things like that. So, and it's looking at GDP and how that's, you know, so it's bringing all that really into account in terms of the assumptions that are there.
Let me just say a little bit about the wider market. I mean, obviously, the government have invested heavily in expansion of airports in the southeast, and that is largely because they're bound by existing policy from 2018, where, I mean, it was a bit of an oxymoron calling it a regional airport strategy when it was the only region was the southeast. What that has demonstrated is growth, but of course it makes it even more London-centric and even more challenging and increasing of costs. So there is an overall growth in passenger numbers per se, and because there is often a challenge that is presented back when you say you're going to reopen the airport, well, it must be displacement from existing airports. Well, undoubtedly there will be, because people have a choice to determine where they go, but that fundamentally depends on what the nature of the routes are, and obviously that is determined by the sort of commercial rationale around why you would want to fly from there, and that comes down to the route planning and the airline locations, and that is where critically our partnership with Munich Airport, when they go to the route planning conferences and argue and articulate, they know best what's likely to fly from Doncaster in the UK and European market. So it's really important, I think, that, you know, if we were doing this before COVID, then legitimately I think there would have been some challenge around, well, where's the market going? But, you know, and, you know, just like mortgages, they do go up and they do go down, but at the moment there is some fairly robust forecasting for the market in general. The second point, I think, is it an investable proposition? Yeah. Well, if you look at other regional airports, and bearing in mind there isn't a single proposition for a reopened airport. In fact, there hasn't been a single proposition anywhere where there's been a reopened airport within the time frame that we're talking about, where you have, if you look at the development costs, so building a new airport is not a viable proposition on a regional basis. Acquiring one, which I think is probably another indicator of whether or not it's a feasible proposition. If you look at, for instance, I think it's the Ontario Pension Fund, I might be corrected on that, but they've just acquired 2 Scottish airports, for instance. They're much, much smaller. In fact, sometimes their flights are subsidised as a result of that by the Scottish government. So there is an interest in airport investment. The challenge, of course, is, you know, as I've indicated previously in this chamber, the public sector often ends up being the investor of first resort, because it ends up de-risking at the front end. And then, as we've pointed out in that financial profile, when you get to positive EBITDA, there'll be a queue of people wanting to come and make propositions when actually they haven't taken the hard miles that we've taken. Yeah. So it's a really, I think there's never been a better time to do this. And coming back to, you know, would we be advising you otherwise? If the information that was in Simca's extensive assurance indicated this was not feasible or financially viable, we would not be making this proposition to full council or indeed to cabinet and scrutiny.
Thank you for that. So, anything further, Councillor Holland? No?
No, thank you.
Thank you. We're on to the last one, potentially unlucky, number 13 question. And it's Councillor Cobby.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're aware that, and I'm happy for you to elaborate hence the question, are there any other local authorities that run local airports, and what has been learnt from their involvement, and also how does it make us prepared for potential reopening?
No, I think that's a fantastic question. I've been some great examples in the UK. If you take, for instance, Luton as a prime example, I think they're operating roughly around 16 million passengers, and obviously they've got fantastic aspiration to achieve up to a kind of 30 million passengers, such as their kind of growth. You can see how that's the financial model of the Luton operation is paying dividends of money returning back into the local economy and obviously supporting local services. So it's a fantastic example. They're also leading around kind of their net zero ambitions around that kind of 2030, 2050 mark. There are other airports, Newquay is another prime example, and similar to kind of Cardiff under the Welsh authorities, where obviously clearly you can see, you know, airports not only just look at kind of traditionally operating as an airport, providing kind of what your class is bucket and spade, but also looking at kind of that development potential. And I think when you talk about kind of the learning from us as an airport, one of the things that was key was recognising this is a South Yorkshire Airport City vision. We have fantastic land holdings. So in regards to kind of the investment zone that's attached to the airport, so what we refer to as DSA 04, so that's 126 acres of prime airside land, ripe for development, similar to kind of with Peel's additional 3 million square foot of development land, all with outline planning permission. So when we talk about kind of going forward, we recognise that some of these airports, the likes of Luton and Cardiff and Newquay, and even, you know, Manchester Airport Group are highly successful for a reason, and it's a cocktail of many things. And we want to try and pick the best from those. And obviously, we are aviation advisors. Some of those have worked at those airports that I've mentioned, have been in very senior positions, and obviously advising us as a council. Yes. So hopefully, in regards to what we're trying to deliver at the South Yorkshire Airport City, we have that blended approach of attracting freight, attracting airlines, attracting private jets and general aviation, but also recognising that there is a bit of a revolution around green aviation travel as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think it's fair to say that most regional airports started out underneath the ownership of a local authority. And there's a trajectory over time, a variable depending upon where it happens to be, around it making a commercial proposition or not, at which point obviously the private sector become interested at that juncture. Currently we're the only sub-region in the whole of Europe that doesn't have a regional airport. And we know from international connectivity, Transport for the North did a report about 3 years ago, which identified the loss of trade by not having that international connectivity. And you know, one of the big pressures at the moment is the trading deficit that we've got, and that doesn't happen unless you trade goods. And for that, I mean, there are other things as well in terms of cutting the red tape, but having the opportunity both to import and export locally creates a wider logistics hub. Good example, we know that Woodlands, who are a major company in Doncaster, they're based along the Great Yorkshire Way. A third of their freight had to go onto the road at Stansted to be then transported up. So if you just look at what the overhead and the cost of that is, as well as the other concomitant impacts, then you can start to see why having a direct trading hub in terms of freight facility, never mind the other elements of passenger-related flight, but you know, it also creates what's called an ecosystemic effect, which is where those catalytic jobs come from, where others want to cluster in and around that, not just the logistics, but some of those high-end advanced manufacturing and aviation-related jobs. And in particular, we're keen to curate that ecosystem so that the nature of the inward investment is consistent with that type of activity. So whether it's a mechanical repairs operation on the DSA 04, where we know there's a lot of companies that are interested in that, or whether it's actually looking at the provision of sustainable aviation fuel through a fuel farm, where all, I think, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's got to be, is it a 10% mix of sustainable aviation fuel within 10 years? For that, you've got to then be in a premium where, one, you've got the right formulation, and two, you've got the right storage, and that then gives you an advantage. So these are all elements that make up the added value around the growth beyond just the airport operations.
Thank you, Damien. Councillor Cobby, any supplementary? No, thank you very much. Well, we've come to the end of the audit, the OSMC questions, and what we're going to do is now include our... Did you have your hand up then? Oh, you're scratching your head, sorry. No, I'm really fine-tuned now to seeing someone's hand go up. I'm homing in on it now, so what we'll do is move on to the audit questions. I hope our audit committee members don't mind, the first audit question is going to come from OSMC, because it's the one we deferred for earlier on. Over to yourself, Councillor Cox.
No.
The question, the audit one, that's been referred to.
What part of the played?
Okay, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Over to our audit committee friends. Any questions?
I've just got a couple. I don't know if you want to do them in part two. We talk about £81 million losses. I think it's point 25 of the report. How are we going to subsidise those losses? The second one I've got is, it talks about governance. Point 30, it says the report recognises that significant risks remain. Some of these risks are critical and require resolution. And then point 32 goes on to say, the report recommends the approval of funding for the project subject to a number of conditions designed to address residual commercial issues and support the project's redevelopment. Can we talk through those risks?
We can do it in two parts if that's okay, because the first part, there's a section within the report that sets out what we think are the risks associated with the project and the mitigating arrangements. So I'm hoping that that's sufficient to sort of, we've tried to consider in broad terms what the key risks are for the project and how we go about managing those. And the specifics in relation to the contractual requirements, so the grant agreement, if we can cover under private, if that's okay, because that was covered under private in relation to the Simca decision. Thank you.
You want to make?
If I can just make a comment, really. I mean, audit, obviously, are here, but they haven't had access to some information that we've had access to.
Let me just be clear, all members have access to the documentation that is linked to this report that you're scrutinising. Yeah, it's supervised because of the commercial sensitivity of that information, but all members, individual members, we'll deal with a question around, does the audit have a role in terms of scrutinising this decision subject to part two, if that's okay, Chair?
I do, thank you for that, but I do find it odd if we're taking these questions into part two. Obviously we're audit in the room with information that they haven't seen. Asking a question from the public agenda surely can be answered in public.
Chair, as you know, and the Vice Chair knows, because he was present, there's a pre-briefing to which audit members were invited, where we identified and shared and walked through the appendices that are in the report. Happy to talk to that again in part two, Chair.
No issues. So we are... Any more questions from audit?
Yeah, good afternoon. In relation to the interest on the loan payment, what happens with the interest? Has any account been taken for that, and what the interest, the interest that's generated and where that will be spent?
Is this the interest cost to CDC, or are you thinking from the perspective of Fly Doncaster?
From the perspective of Fly Doncaster and the loan that Fly Doncaster will be having.
Can we cover this as part of the private if it's more in relation to Fly Doncaster?
I will make a note of that. Just the same question again, Councillor Cowell, but in part two, yeah? There's no problem, yeah? Anything else from our audit colleagues? No, thank you. I think we've covered now all the part one questions, really. So, yeah, we can move on to a part two process. So, some word. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Oh, is it still there? Oh, yeah. What I'll state is, in accordance with council procedure rules, I would like to ask the public and press and non-OSMC members to leave the meeting during any deliberations, and will be brought back into the meeting once they've concluded. Is this agreed?
Just for clarity, is that including?
Yeah, it's including audit. We've clarified that. Including audit as well. That's okay.
She's abandoned me.
Okay, following the discussions we've had for the last couple of hours, last few hours, we're going to move on to a number of recommendations. Paragraph 3 of page 1 of the OSMC agenda asks the committee to give consideration to and feedback on the report presented today. Does the committee feel it has undertaken this today? All agreed? Thank you. The first recommendation is from my colleague Vice Chair.
To reflect the points discussed at the meeting, the chair be given authority to send a letter to the Mayor about discussion held in this meeting. Is this seconded? Does the committee agree?
Thank you. Now on to recommendation 2. Recommendation 2, once again, the Vice Chair will propose.
Addressing Scrutiny's role going forward, OSMC wishes to ask the established scrutiny panels to assist in providing number of accountability by addressing issues to be agreed through the overview and scrutiny work plan.
It's okay. Is that seconded? Different seconder, please. Thank you.
Is that agreed?
Committee agreed.
A recommendation would be to send the residents of Doncaster a referendum consultation of what this money is actually going to be on. We know that it has. What I'm trying to do is get politics out of it. So we want the people to understand what this money is being used for, and if they think it's fine, then it's fine. If they don't, then it's don't. And I know that made no sense.
If I can just explain the reasoning behind that,
go on,
please. Obviously, one of the LGA highly recommended things to do, and it's one thing I picked out. I still remember it ringing in my ears when we had an excellent LGA presentation. It's good practice. Talks about public consultation should be at the forefront of any decisions, especially decisions with such the size and magnitude of this one. And I took that to heart when I was in there getting the training, and I've remembered that. And if we do not hold a public consultation about this issue, we're never going to hold one in the future, because this, as I keep having been told, this is an immense project, and with the amount of money we're talking about, public money, and now there are a lot of things to resolve, I believe the right thing to do is to consider a public referendum with regards to getting the view of the people out there who are actually in effect funding this project, and that's my reason behind it. Thank you.
No, I absolutely disagree with that.
Chair, can I add? So I've been at pains throughout the whole of this engagement, informally and formally, to point out the scope of who the decision makers are, and also the roles, respectively, of particular governance structures, be they overview scrutiny management, be they audit. This is a decision to receive funding that's already been decided upon. Yeah, this decision that you're scrutinising, not to what extent is the funding going to be utilised. There will be other opportunities to engage with the public, to form their views. Yep. It is within the existing budget and policy framework to be able to make the decision that we're talking about. Yeah, it doesn't require a public consultation per se for this decision. Yeah, and I've been very clear about being clear on the governance for this. I would be falling short of my statutory duty not to sort of recommend that that's. We do not have a constitution that allows for decision by referendum. Yeah, there are some decisions which are open to referendum, but this already exists within the policy and budget framework for the council. Yeah, it's a different set of circumstances for the decision to come to full council. Your role is to scrutinise the decision. Yeah, you can make whatever recommendations you like, but in so doing, you will be contradicting the existing constitutional budget framework and policy framework. So I just need to give you that advice, Chair. Happy to advise outside the meeting, but you need to agree your recommendations, and my advice would be that you return to this outside, or you frame it differently. And one of the framings could be that you expect full maximum amount of consultation and engagement ahead of the full council meeting, for instance.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take all that information into account. We will obviously revisit this recommendation. I will still consider it outside of this meeting as part of the comments and recommendations to Cabinet. But thank you for that advice. I've taken it on board, and I will still make due recommendations in due course. Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, we'll take this away. The two recommendations that have already been agreed on, they're covered. The third one is to agree that I will go away from this meeting, have further discussions discussing the advice that's been given by the Chief Exec, and then I'll make a recommendation from that. All of those who are in agreement that should happen, please, do you agree with it? Who's proposing it? Well, can someone propose, please? And we'll do it properly. Frank proposing, seconder. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other recommendations from the committee? Thank you. We'll now close the meeting. If there are no further recommendations, I will close the meeting and thank everyone for attending. Thank you for showing such stamina.